with ASCD, and a former board member of the American Health Association. Yes, so happy to see you. It's been a minute since I've seen you in our meeting, so it's good to see you. Welcome, and I will turn the floor over to you.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Can I just commend as well the comments in the last panel, because to be honest, many of the comments that were in the last panel are things that I'm going to be reiterating and reinforcing. And I was just jotting down a couple of notes, and some of the things that Kelly was saying around focus on SEL and a focus on trauma, and Loretta, who was talking about the need to build relationships with not only the students, but build relationships with your local community and build relationships with other people who are represented in this WSCC model. They're just so key. And what I keep saying as well from an education perspective is we need to build up those things that we have control over. And the thing that we have most control over when we interact with the students and we interact with communities are those protective factors of connectedness, of relationships, of building a sense of belonging and community. I'm going to run through these slides. I may skip over a couple because I did prepare them for about half an hour, and I don't want to go over since you've had such a information-packed day. So I believe that everybody does have the handout, so you can always go back, and if there's anything you have questions about, send me a question as well via email. But you've been focusing on the WSCC model, and we've actually done a couple of webinars with CDC over the last couple of months about reopening and using the WSCC model. And it's just been interesting as we go through the last couple of months how the first initial concerns and reactions were around the physical environment, the health and safety. But there was also this key impetus early on about really needing to focus on the social emotional climate that both Kelly and Loretta and Kathy as well were talking about in the last session. But then as it started to progress, we began to see that there was a need to focus on staff well-being, the engagement with families, the engagement with communities. And then in the last couple of sessions, what's becoming obvious, and I think you were touching on it in the last session as well, and I didn't see this morning, but I imagine you may have, is that this is something which is affecting every person to differing degrees. And so it means this is a universal issue which is affecting the trauma and well-being of everybody to different aspects. And so we're really going to be looking back at health services, nutrition services, who have been some of the frontline workers over the last couple of months. And just today, in fact, we were talking about in a couple of other meetings and a presentation earlier this morning about the need to focus on both health education, but also physical activity. One, to prepare ourselves for what's coming or the next pandemic, or even ways to actually have our students and ourselves deal with some of the issues of stress that we're currently experiencing. It's a long way of saying the WSCC model is encompassing everything in this. What this is also showing us, and I'm speaking about this from an education perspective, because this is something that health professionals and health educators have known for a long time, but this is really a community-wide Maslow before Bloom event. And I think that educators, if they didn't know it before, are understanding it now. And what that means, with a little bit more detail, is that there are things that we all need, not only to survive, but to thrive. And we need to worry about the health and the safety and the belonging of ourselves and our students and our communities before we start to worry about their cognitive development. And if we rush too quickly into cognitive development and academics without making sure that everyone feels safe or as safe as practical, then we're going to lose those students and they're going to be lost more so in this education crisis. And for those that don't know or may well know, we actually align the whole child tenets, which is that center circle inside the WSCC model, back to Maslow's hierarchy. And of course, there's a reason why you've got health and safety on the bottom, and you worry about those as foundational aspects before you start worrying about challenging them academically. So what I want to talk about today are three little things about there are strengths coming out of this crisis, but there are also issues, and then some things that we can do, and then how actually using the WSCC model might play back into it. So some of the strengths coming out of the crisis, and I've demonstrated these or designed these or illustrated these are probably the better word, on a scale. There are strengths. Everybody is looking to get back to a sense of normalcy. Now, there's not going to be going back to the same normal that it was, but people are seeking normalcy. They're seeking that sense of community when schools reopen, to whatever extent. There's also been an affirmation or a positive appreciation of expertise over the last couple of months. Expertise from our education support professionals, expertise from our school health professionals, but also expertise from our educators, because we've had so many parents and families actually experience what it's like to try and keep kids engaged. But one of the biggest strengths that we've had is this understanding, and it's almost been a community-wide or a society-wide understanding that well-being is a key part of the education process. But at the same time, if we look at this as a scale, there's also issues that we're going to be experiencing or that we are experiencing right now. There are levels of anxiety that we're seeing not only in the chat box during this, but you're seeing it every day in the newspaper about what's going to be safe to go back to. There's a sense of vulnerability, and unfortunately that sense of vulnerability is being felt more by the disadvantaged students or the disadvantaged communities in our country. And there is trauma which is going to be widespread. Obviously, there is going to be effects of trauma which are different depending on different communities and schools, but almost everybody is coming back into schools with varying degrees of trauma. So when we look at well-being, we've seen over the last couple of months this takes a village approach, that there's been this universal appreciation that we need to focus more on both individual but collective well-being, whether it's the opera singing in Italy or the applauding of the health workers in New York. Well-being has been upfront. And from an education focus, it's been really heartening to see how many educators have been focused primarily about their students and their kids feeling connected. I don't have the picture here, but there was one teacher that went back to his classroom, got the aquarium, got his office chair, got the plant from his classroom, and redecorated his living room so it looked like the classroom that the kids were used to, so that when there was that interaction via the video, the kids could see something which felt normal. There has been this push to get well-being front and center in education. I've actually seen very, very little pressure from schools or from educators to focus back onto academics. And here's some examples. I'm sure that people here have seen other examples as well about parades or about support. There's been this universal understanding that health and well-being is foundational. And I think that makes a marked difference in this crisis or this period compared to some things that we've seen before. There's also been, whether it's been frontline workers serving food, whether it's been athletic departments doing celebrations of the graduates from this year, or whether it's been the students themselves who have seen the need to actually come together to do things as groups. there's been this calling for community and belonging. And it has been this, as we call it, this collective Maslow before Bloom moment. So what I'm hopeful for is that we start to see a change in what we regard to be an effective education or an effective school. And it's one that really has that student and the teacher's well-being at the forefront. And I even think that Kelly may have mentioned back to basics in the last panel as well when I was listening. And it's not a back to basics in terms of reading, writing, arithmetic. It's a back to basics about what education is about and what makes a good, sound education. When you look at effective pedagogy, it's all based around knowing who your students are, having relationships with them, knowing what culture and context they come from, knowing how to reach them. That's the skill of education. So ensuring, first of all, that they have access to both physiological and safety needs, and that need to feel connected and loved by teachers and classmates. And what's been really encouraging as well, and I want to make sure that, because I know we have a differing roles and job titles of people who are attending this. These are some of the headlines that are coming out in the education media. There's been, again, this call for social emotional growth mindset, emotional supports, child well-being, all right, COVID-19, a focus on what schools should do around play and physical activity and feeling connected. There's been this real push, and it's not only in the US, it's also been globally, but this real push to understand that connectedness is a key part of it. And I know that for many of us, we've spoken about these kind of topics and these kind of things for a number of years, if not a number of decades. And I wouldn't have wished this crisis to appear, but this crisis has opened up the ears of other people and other stakeholders in community to hear and to appreciate and to understand what's happening. And so I do think it's a time when we can start to leverage our voices and try to make some changes. Now, whilst that was the positive, there is also the mirror image, which is the issues. And as we talked about before, this is not something, we've had issues and we've had crises in this country before, whether it's violence, whether it's tornadoes, whether it's flooding. And there's always been this focus, all right, we need to focus attention on this one school or this one section of the community. But this is something that's affecting everybody. All right, but unfortunately, it's affecting those who are marginalized the most. There was one talk I was in a week or so ago, which is basically saying, we were saying that what this crisis is showing is that the cracks in society are actually chasms. And if we're not careful, we're going to have kids and we're going to have sections of community that fall into these chasms and don't come out because they don't have the networks and they don't have the supports. The other issue is that many of the people that have been working the hardest over the last couple of months, whether they're education support professionals, public health, school health, community workers, teachers, they are the same people that we are going to be looking towards to try and ameliorate the effects of trauma when schools start to open. But these people themselves are suffering, and these people themselves are suffering from trauma, have lost loved ones, have people who are sick, or potentially have people that might get sick if they go to school and then come back, all right, and bring something with them. So we need to understand that while we're trying to build a protective, supportive environment, we also need to include the workers and the frontline workers who have been overly worked and overly stressed over the last couple of months. I'm not going to go through these in detail. Fortunately or unfortunately, we have some experience with trauma. So back in October of last year, our EL magazine at ASCD was focused on making schools safer. And these protective factors, or these items, were taken from a series of articles that you can access. But if you look through them, whether it's check-ins and scheduling, or patterns, or building relationships, or explaining and discussing why, and not just COVID why, but why about anything, or allowing students and staff off-ramps, or providing them avenues to exercise and get out into nature. All of these things are about developing a safe, supportive environment. The last one there is going to the well, and I think it's something that we can build on, is that we have developed over the last couple of months these relationships. There have been teachers and there have been educators who have really made great strides in making sure their kids feel part of the school and connected. And we want that to continue. We don't want that to stop. We want that to be understood to be part and parcel of education. But there's also been these connections between community services, community groups, different sectors. And it comes back to that WSCC model, that we have the child in the center, we array the resources and services around that child, and we work together around common policies and try and align practices and processes. So we want to continue to grow and nurture these connections. And really, one thing that this does provide is it does provide us a chance to do a reset. School will not look the same. Communities will not look the same. They will be different. And we won't realize it until we start to reopen. And so we have a chance to actually influence what our schools and our community interactions look like and the way that our services work together. So if we're looking at utilizing the WSCC model around this, there are a couple of things I just want people to understand and appreciate, is that health and well-being are now, and that's not the long-term now, it's the immediate now, it's the current now. They are currently core components for any school opening. So health and well-being are at the table. They need to be at the table. They have to be at the table. Health and well-being are also being recognized by educators, or maybe it's not recognizing, maybe it's a reappreciation by educators, that it's a foundational piece of effective education. And health and well-being are also viewed by schools and their communities as not only being focused around physical health, but we're talking about mental health. We're talking about trauma. We're talking about anxiety. And we're talking about their social and emotional well-being and building those protective factors and sense of belonging so we can ameliorate some of those effects of trauma. So, some suggestions to summarize or to end up is that you are at the table, so you need to be vocal and don't be siloed. You are a core part of reopening, and the reopening will continue. It's not just a discussion that happens in August. This will continue throughout at least the calendar year, if not onward, about how schools reopen, how they change, how they develop. You need to utilize your voice to draw a line between your school health component or role and school success with effective teaching and learning, because these things are aligned. You need to align your shack or your team to the district's COVID-19 and reopening team, if you're not already, but I imagine most of you are. And using the WSCC model as a frame, you need to start to work and see how can we start to coordinate policies and processes? But let's also keep the focus on being, how do we improve learning and how do we improve health? There are common goals that we're all seeking, and this is providing us an opportunity, an unfortunate opportunity, but an opportunity to re-engage people in this discussion. And this comes from our publication that we put out when we launched the WSCC model. So we want all parties involved at the table with a common understanding. And the key to moving from the model of WSCC to action is this collaborative development of local school policies, the day-to-day practices within each sector, and developing joint and collaborative policy. It's half the challenge, and putting it into action and making it routine completes the task. We are at an opportunity to take this step. We need to make our voices heard. We need to improve education so it becomes a more holistic, well-rounded, child-focused framework. What we will be seeing as well, and this is just quickly summing up, is we will be seeing lots of different innovations. There won't be, as we were saying before, a cookie cutter approach. There'll be lots of different ideas and suggestions. And there's a whole range of free presentations, one later on this week, but also some newsletters and in-service articles showcasing how you can start to use some of these things moving forward. I know that that was a rush. I also know that I've left you just 5 minutes, Casey, to do a summary. But again, thank you for everything that you do at ASHA. The work that you and the members do is critical. And I think people are just finally starting to realize how important the work is, and how if we all start to work together, we can actually have some positives come out of this crisis.
I 100% agree with that, Sean. Thank you for sharing that closing keynote opportunity.